At the auction, my fiancé sat in the front row, arm in arm with his mistress. He was ready to spend a fortune to win the final and most valuable item for her. Before the gavel could strike for the last time, I raised my paddle, tripling the price. Gasps filled the room as everyone turned to look at me, including my fiancé. Unbothered, I casually placed the emerald I had just won on the tray of a slender, handsome waiter. Patting his cheek, I teased, "Stop working here. It breaks my heart to see it." Later, that waiter was working in my bed, and outside the door, my fiancé cried his heart out. Chapter 1. 1 million. 1 million. Wow. Bidder number 49 has just raised it to 3 million. The whispers around me grew louder. Of course. Mr. Law is generous, throwing out 3 million like it's pocket change. True. He's famous for his charitable spirit. Charity? Ha. I glanced at bidder 49, Alexander, who was lounging back on the sofa, his long arm draped lazily over the shoulder of the woman beside him. Even his posture radiated ease and confidence, as if victory were already in his grasp. The woman turned to look at him, her eyes sparkling with admiration and reverence. Tisk. I shook my head. If there's one thing I'll never do as well as this, Sophia, it's wear that nauseating expression of worship. Alexander, a self-made man who had risen from humble beginnings in the mountains, was now the CEO of a major company. But deep down, he still reeked of insecurity, always drawn to women who idolized him. "Miss, your tea is here." A clear and crisp voice interrupted my observations. I accepted the tea and blew gently on the surface, scattering the foam. On stage, the host's voice was rising with excitement. 3 million. Going once. I took a sip, savoring the taste before commenting. The tea's oversteeped. 3 million. Going twice. I placed the cup down and casually raised my paddle. 3 million. Go. 10 million. Chapter 2. I spoke slowly, letting my words sink in. The room erupted instantly, with all eyes turning toward me. Some people even turned on their phone cameras, snapping pictures incessantly. Alexander shot to his feet, spinning around to glare at me. The auctioneer froze for a moment before recovering, exclaiming excitedly, 10 million. Any higher bids? Silence. Sophia clutched at Alexander's sleeve, her urgency plain as she tried to persuade him to raise the bid. But Alexander only frowned deeply, refusing to speak. I smirked. Poor Sophia had no idea about the state of Alexander's company finances. I, on the other hand, knew everything. When I left, I took a significant portion of his loyal clientele with me. He was drowning in debt now. How could he afford to compete with me? 3 seconds later, the gavel struck decisively. Congratulations to bidder 74 for winning the ring. The applause echoed around me, but my gaze stayed locked with Alexander's. I raised my right hand slightly, pressing my thumb and forefinger together to form a small circle, making a mocking gesture toward him. His face darkened instantly, his expression like smoldering coal, veins popping on his forehead. "Ah, Alexander, Alexander, not only are you small in bed, but your wallet's equally underwhelming, isn't it?" Chapter 3. The auctioneer descended from the stage himself, delivering the item to me with utmost respect. From across the room, Sophia's face was twisted with jealousy, her eyes shooting daggers at me as if I had stolen something sacred from her family. I held the emerald ring up to the light and gave it a cursory inspection. Ha, just a low-grade, impure piece of junk, the kind of trash you rebrand as charity to claw your way back up. I tossed it casually onto the tray of a clean-cut young waiter standing nearby. "From now on, brew your tea a shade darker than this ring," I said. "Use it as your benchmark." The room erupted into a new wave of gasps and cheers. "Who is she? Which company is she from? I've never heard of her before." The waiter seemed to finally process what had happened. His fair cheeks flushed a bright red. "And no, ma'am, I can't." Shoo. I raised a single finger, pressing it lightly against his lips. The next moment, I paused, mildly surprised. This boy's lips were unexpectedly soft and springy. Ah, youth. No wonder Alexander enjoys his habit of cradle snatching. I glanced over at Alexander, who was shoving his way through the crowd toward me, his face a storm of anger. Smirking, I turned back to the waiter, gently brushing my fingers over his chest. I slipped a golden business card into the seam of his pristine shirt. Master your tea-making skills and come to Lee International, I teased. I patted his baby-smooth cheek, meeting his wide, tear-brimmed eyes. Stop working here. It hurts my heart to see it. The room broke into chaos once again. Oh my God. Lee International. What's a global corporation doing at such a small auction? Isn't their headquarters in the U.S.? Shut up and take more pictures. I can't believe I'm in the same room as someone from Lee International. Amid the frenzy, I gracefully picked up my bag and turned to leave. I had barely taken a few steps when Alexander's furious roar echoed behind me. Roxana! I didn't stop, with Sophia holding him back. Alexander couldn't even free himself, much less catch up to me. But even if he did, what then? The corners of my lips curled into a mocking smile. This game is over, Alexander. The days when I, the daughter of a multinational empire, hid my identity to endure hardship by your side, ended the moment I found that used condom in the back of your car. Chapter 4. As I reached the entrance, Alexander's driver approached me, looking slightly startled by the crowd following behind me. Still, he quickly composed himself, adopting a serious demeanor. Miss Lee, this is Mr. Law's private vehicle, he said firmly. I'm afraid I can't give you a ride. I paused, confused for a moment, before realizing what he meant. He thought I intended to hitch a ride and take advantage of Alexander's car. Glancing at his poker face and the curious onlookers behind me, I could only imagine the soap opera he'd conjured up in his head. In his mind, I had stormed in to confront the mistress, been humiliated, and was now left with no choice but to beg him for a ride home, a story where he was reluctantly caught in the middle. Amused, I tilted my head, observing the way he guarded Alexander's car as though it were a treasure. I moved left. He blocked left. I stepped right. He shifted right. He was like a mother hen shielding her chicks, resolutely refusing me access to the car. A flicker of disdain crossed his eyes. Don't try to freeload, Miss Lee, he sneered. Company vehicles aren't for you to mess around with. I chuckled softly. Is that so? Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a set of keys. A sharp click sounded as the headlights of a Bentley flashed in the distance. I sighed. I'm sorry to trouble you, but could you move Mr. Law's car out of the way? It's blocking my Bentley. Chapter 5. The driver's normally stoic face cracked at last. His jaw dropped as he stared at me, wide-eyed in disbelief. I walked past him, pushing him aside as I reached for my car door. A furious roar sounded behind me. Roxana, stop right there. I turned to find Alexander standing just 3 steps away, looking at me as if he didn't recognize me. His face was a mask of grief. Roxana, I can't believe you would stoop so low just to spite me. I raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you talking about? What else could it be? Sophia cut through the crowd, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. Alexander still cares about you, but you humiliate him for money. You betrayed him and sold your body for that 10 million. Her words sent murmurs rippling through the crowd. So that's who she is, just some gold digger flaunting her wealth at an auction. Lee International? Must be a front. The real money's coming from some old man she hooked up with. Shoo! She looks like she could seduce a powerful tycoon. Better watch what you say. I took a deep breath, keeping my composure. You're all talking nonsense. If you're going to sling mud, at least have some proof. Proof? Alexander said, his voice sharp with anger. You want proof? He pulled out his phone and thrust it in my face. See for yourself. I frowned, glancing at the screen. It was full of vulgar text messages. If Mr. Law wants to close this deal, he'd better send Miss Lee to my bed. One read. When Alexander hadn't responded, the sender, clearly agitated, had followed up. Send her over now, and I'll seal the deal. Otherwise, I'll pay her directly and leave you with nothing. Chapter 6. It all clicked. The sender was Pablo Wong, a procurement manager from one of the client companies. For the sake of Alexander's business, I'd endured several nauseating drinking sessions with him. One time, when he got drunk and tried to grope me, I knocked him out cold with my handbag. After that, I'd cut ties with him completely. Apparently, he'd gone crying to Alexander with lies. I looked Alexander squarely in the eye. So you believed him? You really think I'm some gold digger who would sell her body for money? My unwavering gaze seemed to shake Alexander for a moment. But before he could respond, Sophia latched onto his arm. Come on, Alexander, she said, her tone dripping with venom. She'd do anything to provoke you. Where else would she get 10 million to compete with us for the ring? And let's not forget, she added slyly, how often she comes home late. Who knows what kind of deals she's making? Her insinuations rekindled the doubt in Alexander's eyes. I clapped my hands once, the sound sharp and decisive, before delivering a hard slap across Sophia's face. Smack! Her head snapped to the side, disbelief flashing in her teary eyes. Alexander! She cried, her voice trembling with grief. Alexander stepped forward, gripping my arm tightly. His voice was low and firm. Roxana, you've gone too far. Chapter 7. Me? Going too far? I couldn't help but laugh, though my chest tightened with bitterness. After all these years, I had sacrificed so much for Alexander. I had forced myself to endure endless drinking sessions to secure partnerships for him, turning my weak stomach into a cast-iron gut at the cost of a severe gastric ulcer. To protect his fragile pride, I had even gone against my parents. Don't look down on Alexander. He'll build his empire from the ground up and prove you all wrong. Looking back now, those words felt childish, even pathetic. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them to meet Alexander's gaze. His hand still gripped mine tightly. I smiled faintly. What now? Are you going to slap me too? To avenge her? Disappointment flickered in Alexander's eyes as he looked at me. Apologize to her, he said slowly, each word carrying weight. Behind him, Sophia smirked, her expression openly mocking. Dropping my smile, I matched his tone. Why should I? Alexander exhaled sharply, releasing my arm from his pocket. He pulled out a checkbook and scribbled on it hastily. He handed it to me. Repay Mr. Wang with this first. As for the rest. He hesitated. I'll settle it after selling the company. I raised an eyebrow. Mr. Wang? Ah, the infamous client, Pablo Wang. Why should you? Sophia screeched, clinging to Alexander's sleeve. Roxana chose to trade her body for 10 million. Why are you paying her debt? Crossing my arms, I watched their performance. Alexander pried her hand away and turned his dark gaze back to me. Now, will you apologize to Sophia? Chapter 8. Both Sophia and I froze. Alexander continued, directing his words at me, his tone heavy with guilt. It's my fault for spoiling you, letting you become so shameless and reckless, striking others without cause. I nearly laughed out loud. And if I refuse? A vein bulged on Alexander's forehead. Then I'll have to teach you a lesson myself. His threat wasn't lost on me. I dropped my smile, my guard rising. Though Alexander had never hit a woman before, I couldn't guarantee he wouldn't start now. Sophia, sensing an opportunity, scurried to the side, her eyes gleaming with schadenfreude. You wouldn't dare. I challenged coldly. The tension thickened, the room silent save for our strained breathing. Alexander slowly raised his hand. I've been too lenient with you. That's why you've become so arrogant, throwing around 10 million like it's a joke. I gripped my phone tightly, prepared to call the police if he so much as swung. Just as his hand began to move, a slender, strong hand clamped down on Alexander's shoulder. The fingers pressed firmly, the tendons flexing slightly, and to my surprise, Alexander couldn't break free. Sir, a calm, slightly amused voice drawled. It's not appropriate to treat a distinguished guest of our auction with such disrespect. Startled, I looked up. It was the waiter from earlier, the one who had served my tea. Chapter 9. He towered over Alexander by a full head and easily kept him pinned, his expression calm and unyielding. Yet, when his gaze met mine, he flashed a dazzling smile, his teeth white against his tan skin. In the sunlight, his grin carried the refreshing air of green tea. Miss, are you all right? He asked, recovering from my surprise. I returned his smile. I'm fine. Thank you. Opening my car door, I added with a playful tone. Beautiful ladies always give 5-star reviews. A faint blush spread across his cheeks as he offered a sheepish smile. Just as I was about to get into my car, Sophia charged forward, her reddened eyes fixed on my Bentley. "That car must be a gift from the old man too," she shouted. "How shameless can you get, flaunting it like this?" The judgmental whispers among the crowd grew louder, and my patience wore thin. Pulling out my phone, I made a call. "Lisa, please acquire a company for me," I said nonchalantly. "Yes, the one I mentioned before. The general manager's last name is Wong. And no, don't inform my father just yet." Hanging up, I glanced at Sophia, whose lips trembled. "Buy a company?" she murmured. Alexander's anger exploded. "Where the hell did you get the money?" Sophia suddenly burst into laughter, pointing a finger at me. "Roxana, you're such a fraud. Who are you pretending to call?" The phone's probably dead on the other end. Her mocking laughter spread to the crowd. "She's delusional, acting like she's rich enough to buy a whole company. Does she think we're fools? That Wong's company is a public one, worth billions, right? She's not even trying to make her lies believable." Their ridicule was relentless, a wave of scorn washing over me. The waiter looked at me with concern, his brows furrowed. Many in the crowd raised their phones to capture the scene, their flashes blinking like tiny judgments. Leaning casually against my car, I waited. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID read Pablo Wong. I answered, setting the phone to speaker mode. Chapter 9. The Horse. Greasy voice crackled through the speaker. "Roxana, so you finally decided to answer me." I furrowed my brow as his laughter came through, shrill and unpleasant. "The feel of your touch on my body last time." He seemed to suck in a breath, almost salivating as he continued. "It's something I've been missing ever since." The sound of gasps spread through the crowd. "Wow, so she really was kept by the old man, playing the game well. Huh? She acted so confidently just now. I almost bought it." "Yeah, right? She doesn't look like someone with 10 million to spare." As they spoke, more and more eyes began to eye me with ill intentions. This old man must be throwing money around like it's nothing, giving $1 million to this woman just to entertain himself. If I had that kind of money, I wouldn't hesitate either. This girl's good-looking, and her body's killer. From the way that old man talks, she must be quite the performer in bed. A flood of filthy comments rained down on me. Before I could respond, Alexander roared in anger. Breaking free from the waiter's grip, he rushed forward, snatched my phone, and slammed it onto the ground. Then, he slapped me hard across the face. "Roxana, you disgust me." He glared at me, each word full of contempt. Chapter 10. The waiter's expression was emotionless as he stepped forward, his fist landing with precision, knocking Alexander to the ground. In a single swift motion, he pinned Alexander's neck with his elbow, keeping him in place. Alexander didn't resist. He lay there, like a soulless husk, his eyes still fixed on me. Sophia let out a cackle, egging the situation on. "Wow, this girl really knows how to put on a show," she mocked, imitating my earlier gestures. "$1 million. Ha ha ha." She slowly walked over to Alexander, poking her finger in my direction. "Ha, $1 million? You really sold yourself for that much? You're pathetic. All this time, I thought Law cared about you for helping him build his empire. But turns out, you're just a greedy woman." Alexander remained silent, his eyes fixed on me. I looked down at the phone on the ground, my face stinging from the slap, and tried to process Pablo's words. When had I ever touched his body? Suddenly, a flash of realization hit me. The only thing I had ever done was hit him with my bag. Did he have some sort of twisted fetish? The mocking laughter from the crowd felt like a tidal wave crashing over me. My fists clenched, and I almost called for the bodyguards. But then something inside me broke. Who could I blame for this mess? I locked eyes with Alexander, his gaze filled with disappointment, but my mind flashed to the disappointed looks from my parents. "Daughter, you'll regret this one day." I raised my eyes to the sky, holding back my tears. It was hard to believe, but at this very moment, I was the daughter of Lee International, a once proud heir reduced to this pitiful state. Just then, an announcement sounded, drawing my attention. The waiter held up his phone, showing the screen to the crowd. According to sources, The Wong family business has been urgently acquired today. Now, we're bringing you live coverage from the scene. Chapter 11. Everyone froze and gathered around the waiter. The phone screen showed a clear image of Pablo being dragged away by security. A faint smile still plastered on his face. His hands clutched his phone, his eyes vacant. A reporter's voice was heard. It seems the general manager was hit hard by the news and is exhibiting signs of mental instability. The camera shifted, revealing the interior of Pablo's office. Walls lined with explicit photos of various women. The cameraman quickly adjusted the focus, but not before everyone saw the shocking images. Suddenly, all eyes turned in one direction. On the walls, still unblurred, were the naked photos of one woman, Sophia. Chapter 12. No, I didn't. Sophia's face drained of color as she waved her hands frantically. Stepping back. I see. I smiled, inching closer to her. No wonder you've been slinging mud at me all this time, turns out. It's your own guilt. Sophia stumbled and fell. Alexander struggled to get up from the ground, his face filled with shock. Sophia, how could you? It's not like that. Sophia cried out. Let me explain. I had my reasons. How? I interrupted, pointing at the auction house. You couldn't even sell yourself for $1 million. Could you? I spat out the words one by one. You're truly despicable. No. No. He forced me, Sophia cried, rushing to grab Alexander's arm, her tone desperate. I did it for your business. Law. Alexander shoved her to the ground. You're degrading yourself. The sound of the waiter snapping his phone shut echoed, his voice ringing out to the crowd. The truth has been revealed. As for, his tongue lingered over the words. Miss Lee, he smirked and continued speaking loudly. With her ability and status, there's no need for her to engage in self-destructive behavior. The crowd exchanged confused glances. That company really was acquired. My God, it's only been 10 minutes since the call ended. Could she really be from Lee International? With her background, why would she need to climb into an old man's bed? Thank goodness I didn't join in the mocking earlier. I snorted coldly and walked toward the Bentley. The crowd instinctively parted, casting uncertain looks my way. Roxana, you can't leave. I heard Alexander calling from behind, and for a moment, I considered ignoring him, but I turned around, walking back toward him in my high heels. A light flickered in Alexander's eyes. He clenched his hands nervously. I know you. Slap. Before he could finish, I slapped him hard across the face. His gold-rimmed glasses flew off and shattered on the ground. He stared at me in shock. I said calmly, that's for the slap you gave me earlier. Chapter 13. The light in his eyes began to fade. I closed my eyes for a moment, then raised my hand and slapped myself. Roxana. He tried to grab my arm, but I jerked away from him. This is for the blind version of me 10 years ago. I stared at Alexander. I truly regret ever meeting you. With that, I didn't look at him again and turned to get into the car. The world behind me fell silent. Just as I was about to open the car door, a thought crossed my mind. I turned around, calling out to the seething Sophia with a smile. No wonder you kept chasing my car earlier. I teased. You thought Pablo bought it for me, didn't you? But didn't he buy one for you too? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sophia frantically glanced at Alexander. Bang! I slammed the car door shut, and the world finally quieted down. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, breathing heavily, trying to calm myself. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a door opening. I turned in surprise, and a handsome, youthful smile greeted me. We offer a service to take VIP guests home. Would you like that? Chapter 14. After he dropped me off at home, I unbuckled my seatbelt and gave him a pat on the cheek. Thanks, waiter. The young man suddenly grabbed my hand, his fingers cool, almost like jade. I raised an eyebrow. He quickly pulled his hand back, then looked up at me, his eyes sparkling. My name is George. I was a little surprised but nodded. I see. Just as I opened the car door, my arm was grabbed again. I turned back to find him slowly letting go of my arm, his lips pressing into a thin line. Some of the money from today's charity auction will be donated to our university. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. I hadn't expected this boy to be a college student. So? His cheeks turned slightly pink. Next week, we're celebrating our school anniversary, and we're inviting all the auction guests. Would you come? I smiled slightly. I won't be going. You should focus on your studies and do your best. He hesitated, then spoke cautiously. Is it because of Mr. Law? Mr. Law will be there too. I furrowed my brow. He studied my expression, then added, You're worried Mr. Law and his companion will feel uncomfortable, right? He sighed. Mr. Law is so lucky to have such a wonderful girlfriend like you. I really envy him. Ha! I turned to get out of the car, and before closing the door, I coldly muttered words. I'll go. Chapter 15. As soon as I arrived home, I received a call. Lisa's anxious voice came through the phone. Sorry, Miss Lee, your father, President Lee, discovered our operation. He cut off the funding, so we weren't able to buy that company. I immediately froze, shocked. Then who bought it? Lisa's secretary seemed confused. We're investigating, but it seems to have been a mysterious buyer. If you're really interested in that company, I'll find another way. Forget it. I leaned back on the sofa. Maybe that company had too many enemies. Someone just happened to get ahead of us and bought it. I hung up the phone and looked around the cozy room. Here, Alexander and I had lived together for 4 years. I had told him it was a rental. In fact, I had bought it long ago. Now, everywhere in the house were memories of the love we once shared. I closed my eyes, opened my phone, and listed the house on a real estate website. It was time to sell it and go back to beg my father for forgiveness. The next day, the agent contacted me, saying a buyer had taken an interest in the house. They were ready to proceed with the transfer without even needing to view it. I was slightly surprised but didn't think much of it. I spent the next few days preparing for the move. Just as I was instructing the moving company to load up the last of the items onto the truck, the door across from mine opened. Excuse me, miss. Are you no longer living here? The man in front of me seemed to have just showered. His damp bangs stuck to his forehead. Tiny water droplets ran down the side of his youthful face. It was the waiter. George? I was somewhat surprised, giving him a once-over. When did you move in? After all, the rent here wasn't cheap. He smiled shyly. It's a friend's place. I'm just staying for a few days. But this so-called few days turned into weeks, and he hadn't moved out by the time of the school anniversary. Chapter 16. On the day of the school anniversary, a large number of distinguished guests gathered. I sat in my seat, watching Alexander lead Sophia through the crowd, exchanging toasts and conversations with various principals and board members. I sneered coldly. It seemed Sophia had used some method to win Alexander's forgiveness. This Alexander really didn't mind the dirt. Did he? Those two were true love, right? Suddenly, a cup was held up to my nose, breaking my train of thought. Miss, this is the tea I just brewed. Would you like to try it? I turned to see George holding the teacup. His long lashes fluttered, hiding a hint of nervousness. I took a sip. It was fragrant and smooth. Not bad. Really? George's face lit up, like a happy puppy who had just been praised. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a necklace. The pendant was none other than the emerald ring I had photographed earlier. I was surprised. You've been keeping it close to your heart. He blushed slightly. I take it out to compare the color when I brew tea. Before I could think of a response, a strong hand yanked the necklace away. I looked up. Somehow, Alexander had appeared behind me, his cold laugh cutting through the air. Still wearing it? Have you really fallen for this poor kid? Chapter 18. Let go. George's voice was cold, completely different from earlier. He gripped Alexander's wrist and warned, I don't want to hurt you, but I won't let go of my necklace. Heh. Alexander seemed to find it ridiculous. A poor kid like you. Do you really think I'm scared of you? He looked George up and down. What right do you have to hold it? I gave him the right. I stood up. It's my property, and I can give it to whoever I choose. This is not your property. Sophia suddenly rushed up, agitated. This was passed down to me by my grandmother. Her voice held back tears. I had no choice but to sell it to the pawn shop due to financial pressure. Exactly. Alexander added. Sophia already told me she was threatened by Pablo and had to sell it. She was tricked into selling the ring to him, and only later did she ask for my help to get it back. Alexander looked at Sophia. You're so foolish. You should have told me sooner. Sophia's voice trembled. Law. I know your business was struggling. I wouldn't have asked for your help if it weren't for my desperation. Clap. Clap. I started clapping slowly. You're quite the storyteller. Alexander's familiar disappointment flickered in his eyes. He changed the subject. Roxana, why are you always so heartless? Heh, I asked, genuinely curious. What should someone with a heart do? After a pause, Alexander said, Give the ring back to Sophia. Chapter 19. I almost couldn't believe my ears. Are you telling me to give away something I bought for 10 million to your mistress for free? Alexander furrowed his brows deeply. What mistress? How many times do I have to tell you? Sophia is just like a sister to me. Sophia froze when she heard this. Alexander continued with righteous indignation. Besides, this ring originally belonged to Sophia. What's wrong with returning it to her? I asked. What about my 10 million? What 10 million? Sophia snapped angrily. If you hadn't messed things up, we could have bought it for 3 million. Alexander paused, not refuting her, but instead looking at me and trying to persuade me. You really liked the place we rented, didn't you? The landlord is selling it, and I've already contacted the agent to buy it. I froze. So, the buyer of my house was Alexander. Alexander approached, trying to grab my hand, speaking softly to avoid attention. I found out that the company was not bought by Lee International. I haven't told anyone about this. I narrowed my eyes, staring at him. So, what? Are you threatening me? Alexander pressed his lips together, stepped back, and spoke again, his voice calm but firm. The house is worth quite a bit. I'll give it to you if you return the ring to Sophia. Looking at their faces, I could see their smug expressions, as if they'd gotten away with something. They thought I wouldn't retaliate. I was about to throw a glass of water in their faces. Whoosh! The water splashed across their faces. I turned in surprise. George had elegantly set down the glass teapot. Sorry. My hand slipped. Chapter 20. The crowd around us gasped in surprise. Sophia screamed, and Alexander's forehead muscles tensed. Both of them were drenched like drowned rats. George blinked innocently, casually adding, I hope you don't mind. You both have such big faces. I only splashed a little. Alexander charged forward, grabbing George by the collar, growling, You're a student here, right? You'll pay for your actions today. George raised an eyebrow, his hands in his pockets, looking totally unconcerned. Deal. I suddenly spoke up. Don't make things difficult for him. If you buy that house and give it to me, I'll return the ring to Sophia. Alexander immediately released his grip on George. You're really doing this for that kid? Sophia interrupted. Roxana, you better keep your word. I nodded confidently. Of course. At that moment, a voice came from the stage. Mr. Law has donated a building to our school. Let's all give him a warm welcome as he takes the stage to speak. Fine. Alexander sneered, finally agreeing to the deal. He straightened his suit and walked confidently up to the stage. As I watched him take the microphone and begin speaking eloquently, I pulled out my phone and sent a message to the agent. Increase the price of my house to 20 million. I had originally listed it for 3 million to sell it quickly. But now? A cold smile spread across my face. I was going to see how he would buy it. Chapter 21. I put my phone down and sighed as I looked at George, who seemed completely indifferent beside me. I really appreciate you standing up for me, I said. But you're still a student, I genuinely advised him. Once you enter society, you'll understand that relationships are crucial. Don't always make enemies. George smiled and leaned in to look at me closely. I don't understand complex relationships. I only know how to be good to the people I care about. I froze. He laughed out loud. Don't mind me. Maybe I'm just too naive. I tend to think things are much simpler than they are. Heh. I picked up a cup of tea and awkwardly smiled along with him. The atmosphere felt strangely harmonious, yet weirdly tense. Suddenly, a mocking laugh echoed from the stage. I believe that a truly great university should not only focus on students' abilities, Alexander raised his hand dramatically, pointing at George. It's not appropriate for that male student to be constantly pestering my fiancé. Chapter 22. In an instant, all eyes turned to me. I frowned deeply, staring at the smug expression on Alexander's face. I stood up and clearly stated, Alexander, our engagement has been called off. That day, after I found the little bag in the car, I had already decided to break the engagement. Alexander froze, his grip on the microphone tightening, but then he casually continued, Roxana, there's a limit to how childish you can be. How long are you going to throw a tantrum? Anger surged in my chest, and I was about to speak when Alexander turned his head and, in a rush, spoke to the principal. The law family's donation of a building isn't meant to support students like this. He smiled coldly, his voice carrying an implicit threat for the continuation of funding. I think the principal should clear up the campus environment and dismiss some of the unsatisfactory students. The principal stood frozen, looking at George with an uncomfortable expression. Heh, Alexander sneered. The law family has added another 10 million. I was a bit surprised. As far as I knew, Alexander's company barely had 10 million in liquid assets left. Was he really willing to empty his pockets just to get rid of George? The principal stomped his foot anxiously. Mr. Law, it's not about the money. Alexander adjusted his sleeves, looking confident. Principal, I advise you not to push your luck. No. Mr. Law, the principal suddenly shouted, interrupting him. He's the son of one of our board members. Following the principal's pointed finger, I saw George casually setting down his teacup. Sorry, he said with a smile. The school? My family owns it. Chapter 23. George's smile was genuine. Mr. Law, if you're going to speak, you should follow through. 10 million, not a single cent less. Alexander's face turned pale with rage as he stormed off. After a short while, George, ever the gentleman, escorted me home. When we said goodbye, I grabbed his arm. Why are you pretending to be a waiter when you're so rich? From what I knew, the board member of that school was one of the wealthiest people in the country, with countless businesses under his name. Waiter? George leaned lazily against the door, laughing. In the soft light of the hallway, his smile gleamed like diamonds. That's just my family's auction house. I was simply looking for someone fateful to try my new tea. But he suddenly leaned closer, the fresh scent of tea surrounding me. I instinctively leaned back slightly. He stared at me. I didn't make it well. Not like my sister, who knows everything. I remembered teasing him earlier, and a blush crept up my neck. If I could. He leaned in, brushing his nose against mine, his black eyes shimmering with moisture. I'd even be happy to be your sister's waiter. Bang! I quickly turned and slammed the door, my heart racing. I couldn't believe I was being flirted with by a boy so much younger than me. My chest heaved with the sudden rush of emotions. Suddenly, a strong arm wrapped tightly around my neck from behind. Warm, sticky breath blew in my ear. My Roxana, we meet again. It was Pablo. I struggled, about to scream for help, when a cloth was pressed against my mouth and nose. Sophia's voice echoed. Quick! Get her to the bed. My eyelids grew heavy, and I slowly slipped into darkness. Chapter 24. I slowly regained consciousness, the daylight streaming through the window. I moved and immediately noticed that my limbs were bound to the bed. Thankfully, my clothes were intact, and there were no signs of discomfort. From the living room, I could faintly hear an argument. Wong, why aren't you doing anything to her? Pablo's voice was filled with obsession. I truly love Roxana. You wouldn't understand. Just being able to touch her, to see her, would make me happy. Then why did you torture me in the first place? Sophia screamed, her voice filled with resentment and unwillingness. You? Pablo scoffed, his tone filled with contempt. You think you're worthy to be compared to her? After a moment of silence, Sophia stomped into the room. She grabbed a cup of water and forcefully poured it into my mouth. Cough, cough, cough. I choked, unable to stop coughing. Pablo rushed in, furious. What are you doing? Sophia, holding the cup, smiled wildly, her body trembling with excitement. Didn't you say you didn't want to do anything to her? She pointed to the empty bottom of the cup. This is a very strong aphrodisiac. If you don't do anything to her, she'll die from the poison. Pablo's expression finally began to falter. I struggled, trying to negotiate with Sophia. Calm down. What do you want? I can give you anything. Sophia bent down, her face close to mine, her smile twisted and malicious. I want you to be ruined. I want you to never be with Law ever again. To my shock, she casually stood up and adjusted the camera. Let's begin. Chapter 25. I trembled all over as Pablo started to undress. His smile was sticky and disgusting. Roxana, don't be afraid. He took slow, deliberate steps toward me. I struggled, the ropes cutting into my skin, leaving red marks. Suddenly, there was a sound at the door. Miss, I just brewed some tea. Would you like to try it? It was George knocking at the door. I screamed. Help! Pablo lunged forward, covering my mouth with his hand. Outside, I could hear someone kicking the door. Sophia quickly ran to the door and locked all the bolts. Moments later, silence fell outside the door again. Sophia smiled at me. Heh. So what if others hear? So what if they call the police? She pointed to the unbreakable door. Let them come save you. The deed is already done. Ha ha ha. With her arrogant laughter, I closed my eyes in despair. She was right. George couldn't break down the door, nor could he open it. Sophia urged. Pablo, hurry up. Pablo made a final decision and completely undressed, just as he lunged toward me. Crash! A loud noise filled the room. The huge floor-to-ceiling window shattered into pieces. The bright sunlight outside immediately illuminated the entire room. George jumped in, shaking off the glass shards from his hair. In the stunned silence of everyone, he smiled at me to reassure me. Sorry, the wall from my house to yours is a bit long. I was a little late. Chapter 26. Tears filled my eyes in an instant. We were on the 27th floor. The exterior wall had nothing but a plaster design. There was absolutely nothing to climb. And if you lost your footing, you would fall into the abyss below. Looking at his bright, sunlit smile, I didn't even know what to say. Then, his expression changed. He crossed his arms, clenched his fists, and the bones in his joints cracked ominously. He looked coldly at the other two, his smile now one of grim determination. You two really have no manners. Why didn't you open the door for me? Sophia screamed and rushed to the door. George quickly stepped forward and slapped her on the back of the neck. Sophia collapsed, unconscious. Pablo, now completely exposed, knelt on the floor, begging for mercy. It was this damn woman who pushed me. I didn't even get a chance to do anything. George punched him in the face, causing blood to spill from Pablo's nose and mouth. With each punch, Pablo's eyes rolled back, and he passed out. George stripped Pablo naked again and tied him up with Sophia, tying them together in a tight knot. Before long, the police arrived. Seeing the situation, they asked George to untie them. George spread his hands. Sorry. In the rush to save her, I forgot how to untie them. So, Mr. Wong was led to the police car in this tangled, naked position, with the crowd of onlookers watching. Among them were reporters who had arrived, snapping photos with their cameras. Chapter 27. George found a family doctor. I felt lightheaded, my heart pounding in my chest. After a thorough examination, the doctor shook his head. This appears to be a potent, unknown drug. We need to analyze its components immediately. We should have results by tomorrow at the latest. A sedative was slowly pushed into my veins. After the doctor left, the room fell silent. George picked up a cup of water, his voice low. Let me get you some water. The moment his hand touched the doorknob, I spoke. Can you save me again? George didn't turn around. Do you know what you're saying? I nodded softly, whispering, yes. The glass in his hand shattered. Throughout the chaotic night, I heard loud knocks on the door several times. Each time, George simply adjusted his face and dismissed them. If you want to go out, go ahead. Maybe he's more important. I'm fine with it. I grabbed his neck and kissed him. Chapter 28. The next day, when I opened the door, I saw cigarette butts scattered all over the ground. And Alexander, his eyes bloodshot, leaning against the wall. "Are you done?" he rasped. I bit my lip and walked past him, heading to the trash. Alexander grabbed my arm. "I don't mind. After all, I've done wrong too. He paused, "are even now, okay? Let's make up." I threw the trash onto the ground and found a small condom box among the garbage. I raised it up, laughing as I asked him, "We're using the same brand. You don't mind, right?" Alexander's pupils shrank. This was the brand I had found in the corner of his car trunk, the same one. Heh. I turned to head back inside, but Alexander grabbed my arm and suddenly spoke. "Sophia is my sister." I was stunned and turned back to look at him. He spoke calmly. "Although we're not biologically related, we were both adopted by the same orphanage. We grew up together." He forced a bitter smile. "I never told you, but I'm an orphan, with nothing. That rural family, it was a lie I told you to deceive you." Leaning back against the wall, he continued, "Sophia and I have always relied on each other. We were supposed to get engaged. She's probably afraid of losing me, so she purposely left that thing in the back of the trunk to make you misunderstand." I paused for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Alexander took a drag from the cigarette butt in his hand and sighed bitterly. "Maybe it's because of my insecurity." Just as I was about to speak, Alexander quickly interrupted me. "But now I have some money." He pulled a wad of bills out of his pocket, letting them scatter across the floor. He grabbed my arm. "I can buy this house. We can start over. You can't afford it. It's worth 20 million now." Alexander was taken aback for a moment but then urgently said, "I can beg the landlord. I can kneel if I have to." I nodded. "Kneel then. I'm the landlord." Chapter 29. After a moment of confusion, Alexander showed a faint trace of self-mockery. "Heh. As expected. You're the daughter of a wealthy family. You already guessed it, didn't you?" I stepped closer to him. "You just didn't want to admit it. Because of your proud self-esteem. Too proud to admit you're a kept man. Too proud to admit you're not good enough for me." A crack appeared on Alexander's expression. I slapped my chest and scolded him. "Enjoying all the conveniences I've provided for you, while deceiving yourself and stepping all over me? It's not like that." Alexander panicked and grabbed my arm. I shook him off, speaking slowly, word by word. "Alexander, you really disgust me." "Disgust you?" Alexander suddenly threw his head back and laughed. "You're no better than my parents. My parents look down on me. I don't even know their names. Where they live. I only know you're rich. You look down on me." "Parents?" I sneered. "You don't deserve to say that word." Alexander was stunned. "What?" I took a piece of paper from my pocket. "Because of your insecurity. Because of your refusal to explain. Because of your self-deception. You've already lost the right to be a parent." Alexander's trembling hand took the paper. I closed my eyes. "That day, when I found that thing in the back of your car, I came to you for an explanation. You just told me not to make a fuss. But you didn't know. I went straight to the hospital." The paper in Alexander's hand fell to the ground, and he collapsed against the wall. In the next second, he slapped himself hard across the face. I stood above him, calmly speaking. "Alexander, you said you're an orphan, but you could have had a complete family." I took a deep breath. "Now, we're completely done." Chapter 30. I slammed the door shut, leaning against it and breathing heavily. George handed me a cup of tea. I felt a mix of emotions, looking around at the disarray, unsure of what to say. George reached out and placed his finger on my lips. "I know," he said softly. "We're just good friends. I'm just helping you. I don't mean anything else." I exhaled a long breath, relaxing as I leaned against his shoulder. Chapter 31. Half a month later, I was sitting in the office of Lee International's headquarters. The giant projection screen displayed the news. The mysterious buyer who previously acquired Wong's company turned out to be Mr. Law from Law Enterprises. Now, after a series of setbacks, Law Enterprises has reorganized and officially merged with Wong's company to form the Law Group. The microphone was then passed to Alexander. He stared into the camera. "From now on, I want to rely on myself. Maybe one day," he murmured softly, "I'll make sure she never regrets loving me." The reporter raised an eyebrow before asking another question. I heard that your sister has been sentenced to prison for intentional injury. What do you have to say about that? Alexander laughed loudly, his voice firm. Sorry. I don't have a sister. I turned off the screen, feeling a slight stir in my emotions, but no longer the sharp pain. I looked out the window. Maybe this was all a new beginning. The secretary entered the room. Mr. Lee, the person you recommended for the assistant position has arrived. I turned around. Oh. The secretary frowned in confusion. He says he's the elite you recommended, but his resume only lists one skill. I raised an eyebrow. What's that? The secretary hesitated. He knows how to make tea.